Welcome to the internal webinar Building Efficiency Accelerator City Training webinar using the Building Efficiency Accelerator Tracking Progress Template, hosted by Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency in collaboration with Weyl Resources Institute and various partners. The webinar is also organized under the umbrella of Building Efficiency Accelerator. We are pleased to announce that 30 people have registered for this webinar, so everybody, welcome. My name is Aristeidis Tsakiris, and I'm an academic employee at Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. The center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. We also support Building Efficiency Accelerator with hosting different webinars from various partners. I would like to briefly introduce the speakers of today's webinar. Debbie is in Weyl Resources Institute Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. She manages the Building Efficiency Accelerator. Eric is in Weyl Resources Institute Ross Center for Sustainable Cities also, and he supports the Building Efficiency Initiative through program development, project management, and research. And Brian is in the International Energy Agency Energy Efficiency Unit and within the Energy Efficiency in Emerging Economies program. On a regular basis, the Building Efficiency Accelerator is conducting webinars. All materials, including recordings and presentations from previous webinars, can be found on Copenhagen Center's Knowledge Management System. In the e-learning section, we have a short shortcut for the Building Efficiency Accelerator webinar collection. The material of today's webinar will be uploaded there shortly. Finally, I would like to inform you that you can send us your question and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. And also, I would like to inform all the attendees that we will have an open microphone policy, so you can, if you want to have a question, you can, at the end of each session, if you want, you can interact with the panelists. So I would like now to hand over to Debbie. Debbie, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Aris. So welcome everyone, and thanks so much for joining as we walk through how to use this this template for how we can track progress of the actions we're taking within the BEA. This is something again that we went over in New York. For those who were able to join at the Sustainable Energy for All Forum, we started working on this there. And so we're looking forward to continuing that conversation with those of you who could join us, and for introducing this same template to those of you who could not be there in New York, and being able to talk about how to use it, how to answer common questions, and have a discussion about also any thoughts you have on barriers to this or how we can improve it. So as many of you know, I think, we are up to 28 cities in the BEA. They range all across the world. We have a strong presence globally, and we're really excited to be able to track the actions that each of these cities are taking. To talk a little bit about where we've been as a partnership and where we're going this year, you'll see that in the second half of 2016, this is just a set of selected milestones that we included that reflect the work and the engagement that all of you have been involved in. And in the second half of 2016, there was a lot of focus on sort of centrally led events, knowledge platforms, this resource portal that Aris mentioned on the C2E2 knowledge management system. We launched the Basecamp platform so that we can all communicate with each other. And we also had, towards the end of that time, some kickoff meetings in individual cities, as well as some regional meetings and events. When you look at the last 5-6 months, there's been a lot more action driven by you, by all of the cities, and all of our local partners. So it's been really exciting to see individual stakeholder engagement workshops, some launch events that we held both in Beijing and Nairobi, new cities joining the BEA continually, and then also we launched this new BEA website, which if you haven't had a chance to take a look, please do in the coming days. It's a great resource and also a shortcut to access all the other resources that we have available, so you can access the knowledge management system, the Basecamp, everything from there. So this shift from being a centrally driven initiative to really being focused on what we want to do, what each of you wants to do in your city, what locally makes sense and is a priority. This is what we want to continue, and we're really excited to talk about how we can track where we're starting and where we're going in each of those actions. These are just some pictures from events around the world. There was a knowledge sharing event in the Philippines that many cities joined on codes. That's on the top left. On the top right was a breakfast that many of you attended at COP22. Bottom left is a stakeholder engagement workshop in Dubai, and then a prioritization stakeholder engagement exercise in Beijing. And as you know, there are different thematic supports that we provide from the Building Efficiency Accelerator. So please continue, this webinar is focused on tracking progress, but please do continue to reach out with your technical questions so that we can continue to connect you with the resources that we have available from the partnership. We think this is one of the strengths of this partnership, is that we can connect you with all of these global experts, so we want to continue to do that. And finally, just to talk a little bit about where we're going from here, we really want in 2017 to be able to help implement the actions you've selected through local work plans and local engagement. We want to help you make the case for why you're doing what you're doing, and so that's what we're talking about today, tracking progress and also estimating impacts. We want to be able to obtain investment to implement those projects. And then finally, we want to, as a partnership, we'll be looking to scale up the impact so we can do even more. So that's it by way of introduction. And I'll pass this over to Eric now to start with the tracking progress piece.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Debbie. I hope everyone can hear me. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. So we have a relatively small group of folks that are all partners to the BEA or cities in the Building Efficiency Accelerator. So we want to make this as interactive of a discussion as possible as we can do over a webinar. So Aris, I'm going to ask if you can unmute everybody. We're going to try this where everybody is unmuted except for how you control your own mute. So you should see in the controls for the webinar near the control panel there's a little microphone button that you can press to mute yourself. So I'm going to ask if you're not making a comment or asking a question for you to mute yourself. So let's give this a try. And Aris, is that possible to have folks unmuted? All right. So to kick this off, as Debbie mentioned, we've rolled out this new tool. It's intended to be a relatively simple template to help cities to track their progress in the BEA process. We want to talk a little bit more about it and the value of using it in the BEA. And again, as a reminder, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. But there are going to be a couple of times where I'm going to actually turn to some of you for your comments and questions. So here's what we're going to cover today. Briefly, the importance of tracking progress. Why is this important, and how does it connect to the BEA Action Process? I'm going to talk about tracking progress in terms of goals, indicators, and methods, and then understanding the impacts of their energy efficiency actions, including the variety of impacts and the multiple benefits of energy efficiency. And then describe a little bit about how we're working with BEA cities to assess the impacts of efficiency actions. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time walking through the template, the BEA template itself, and an example of selecting goals, indicators, and methods, and then also using it to track and to report on progress. So I'm going to, in particular at the end, I'm hoping that you will walk along with the example and be trying to answer the template yourself as we're going through it. Note that that this template is on Basecamp. There's a message from late last week there that has links to the template. You can download it and be using it as we walk through the template during the webinar. So I'd encourage you to get that Word version of the document from Basecamp to walk through it as well. All right, so why do we track progress? Anybody have thoughts on this that you would want to share? Anybody? It's a pretty easy one. Why is it important to track progress in any of your cities?
Meltem,
I can hear you. Meltem, do you want to talk about why it's important to track progress?
Bizi duyabiliyorlar mı?
All right, well.
I can try. Go for it, Eric. It's Tulani from South Africa.
Great, yes, please, Tulani.
So you're tracking the progress because you've sort of seen where you want to go and you want to see how far you've come, and it's one of those things. If you're not measuring it, you can't manage it, and if you're not keeping score, then you're only practicing. So this really helps to put some kind of controls in and have an idea of where you're going. Nice. So that you can help the cities and know what to strengthen or where the effort should be directed.
Yeah, I like that. If you're not keeping score, you're only practicing. That's a good one. Yeah, so there's that's a couple of really good reasons. I've put together a list. This is barely all of them. There are probably many more, but here's just some ideas as to why this is important. So, assessing progress against our goals, helping us to prioritize how we're spending our time and our activities, to understand if we're having the impacts we want to have, help us to be accountable and transparent to decision makers, to stakeholders, and also as a communications tool with stakeholders, understanding what information is important to which stakeholders and being able to communicate that clearly and ideally in quantitative ways. And then also to use this information to improve our efforts over time. So here's I'm going to walk through the BEA action process itself to understand how we're thinking of tracking progress as a component of it. So on the left, you see where most of you as BEA cities came into the BEA with limited activities on building efficiency and a desire to do more. On the right, there's the vision, what we're aiming for in the longer term. As I think you all know, BEA is linked to sustainable energy for all and a 2030 vision of doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvement globally. And for the BEA, we're thinking about specifically how do we make that happen in your city. So just keeping in mind that kind of scale of time. We've mostly been focusing on a nearer time frame with many of you focusing on this year or 18-month work plans, but really it's this 2030 vision, which is the ultimate goal that we should be keeping in mind. So stage 0, how we've is this commitment. There are 5 stages in the BEA process. This one starts with the partnership agreement. So all of you all the cities have joined, said, yes, I care about improving building efficiency. I'm going to do a project, I'm going to do a policy, and I'm going to track my progress. So typically this is a stage of that happens internal with the government, identifying stakeholders and thinking about how do we engage, and then typically this stage ends with a public commitment where this partnership agreement, this commitment to improve building efficiency is shared with a broader group of stakeholders in a community. Maybe that's a public engagement process, a kickoff event, an opportunity to make it clear, yes, we've made this commitment, we want your input and as to how we get this done. So that's the beginning of stage one, typically, is understanding what we want to do. All right, we've made the commitment to take action. What actions specifically are we going to take? So identifying what project, what policy, and to understand what metrics and what progress we should be measuring. So typically we've seen that take about 3 to 6 months depending on the city, and at the end of that each city is expected to have specific actions that they want to achieve and a work plan to achieve them. So stage two, the development stage, this is how you achieve what you've set out to do, the specific goals that you're aiming for. This is where most of the BEA cities are now. You're in the process of developing the technical documentation and funding for your projects, drafting policies, understanding with stakeholders what barriers are in place and how policy can help to address them. And then at the end of this process, at this phase, typically we have those things in place, a policy adopted, and then able to move into the implementation phase. So that's now that we have a policy, now that we have a project that is clearly documented, how do we actually do the construction to improve the building? How do we actually do the implementation of this policy to ensure that the energy savings that are possible are achieved? So that can include training, it can include enforcement, it can include a lot of different methods on the policy side. And depending on what that action is, it's typically a 2 to 5 year period of implementation before all of the actions that are planned are underway. And the final stage, which is really just the continuation of a cycle, is the improve stage. So once you have all those energy saving actions underway, the question you should be asking yourself is, how can we do better? How can we be getting more energy savings from those specific actions? How can we be considering new actions? What other new actions would be appropriate and would make sense to save additional energy and to provide additional benefits to citizens in our community? So that's really continuation of this cycle. So going back to the assessment and the development stage to identify what else can be done for continuous improvement. So that's kind of one way to think about the tracking progress. These are the steps along the BEA action process, and what we're going to talk about is how we track progress at each of these steps. So again, here's those 5 steps, and I want to talk just briefly. I know there's been many questions from BEA cities about what kind of progress we want to track. Well, there's at least 3 kinds of progress, and we'll touch on each of them today briefly. So first, there's enabling actions. So these are things like stakeholder engagement, like understanding the barriers, like developing language for policy that themselves don't save energy, but are essential building blocks to be able to take action. So these enabling actions are happening throughout the BEA process. The next sort of progress is actually being able to measure the impacts of policies. So typically things like energy savings, cost savings, new job creation, understanding improved health impacts, the variety of things that can come from energy efficiency that Brian will talk about more in the future. And we don't see those impacts until the implementation and the improvement stages. But it's really important to be thinking in advance about how we want to measure those, which sort of impacts we want to see. And then finally, in the improvement stage, we also get to expand the scope and potential benefit of our work by considering new actions and the increased impacts of the policies and projects that we had already begun in the implementation stage. So there's a lot of upfront work that goes into creating these longer-term impacts and benefits that you don't see until the implement and improve stages. And we need to be thinking in advance how we, what we need to do to get there. So just also wanted to mention this as a kind of a near-term request to all the BEA cities. We are wanting to work with you to make sure there is some sort of interim outcome by September 2017. So this is, essentially the end of the development stage, where you have this documented project, a policy drafted and ready for implementation. We're wanting to work with each of you to make sure you have a very specific, tangible outcome to achieve in the next 6 months by September of 2017. I know many of you have already identified those, and it's now a matter of just pulling together the pieces to get there. So here's a few more examples of what those may look like. I want to just pause and see if there are any questions or reflections on any of this so far around, what you've been able to achieve so far in your work, and the concerns and challenges you have on the BEA action process to achieving that interim outcome in the next couple of months. What have you seen through this process so far?
I'm Zolzaya from Ulaanbaatar City.
Yes, hi.
Hi, and I would like to ask about is there any specific BEA policy and the guidelines you have, or we have actually national green development and energy laws and policies, and does it actually fully satisfy the requirements?
Yeah, I mean, good question. So we are asking all BEA cities to implement a policy and a project. So that doesn't mean you need to create a new one. That may just mean that there is a national policy that is relevant and that you want to see implemented in your community. So for example, I don't know if they're on the line, but in Bogota in Colombia, their main effort on policy is around implementing a national green building standard, and making sure that it's relevant and it's designed in a way for implementation at the city level, and that there's engagement of stakeholders to make sure they understand it and are able to take action on it. So yes, I think if you have identified a national policy that's relevant to your goals and what you want to achieve under the Building Efficiency Accelerator, that's great. It's something you can do to build on what is already happening nationally, and to align your work at the local level to actually ensure that it's being implemented as fully as possible. Good question. All right, so for the sake of time, please continue to ask questions and share your reflections as we go through. We'll have a couple other times to stop and talk through this. So just really briefly, the elements of a plan for tracking progress, we're encouraging you to think of basically 3 different components. What goals do you want to achieve? And we're asking you to think about this in each of the steps in the BEA process. What is your goal in this step? How will you measure your achievements in that step? Those are the indicators. And then the methods. How will you track and report your indicators? What methods or tools will you use to be able to report and track? So here's one way to think about goals in each of these stages, right? So in the commitment stage, you think about making sure the commitment is visible, that there's a vision that's shared among stakeholders. In the assessment stage, you want to develop data, you want to make sure there's stakeholder engagement. These are some general ways of thinking about what kinds of goals you may have at each stage in the process. In the development stage, thinking about identifying funding, having a draft policy in place. The implementation stage, this is where your goals are around saving energy or reducing costs. And then in the improvement stage is being able to think through how do you save energy more broadly across the city, even expanding upon the policies that you already and projects you have in place, and maybe creating new ones. And here's just a screenshot of the tracking progress template. We'll come back to this at the end, but wanted to give you a sense of basically here are those 5 stages and those 3 questions in the stages in the rows and the questions in the columns. And you'll see there's an additional column here around outcomes, around how you can record the results that you have achieved. So with that, we'll come back to the template and walk through that again in a minute. If anybody has any burning questions on that, we can take them now, but I want to hand it over to Brian to give him a chance to talk through in a little bit more detail impacts of and how we track the progress on specific impacts that we can see through our work. So Brian, I'm passing the controls over to you.
Okay, great, thanks Eric. So hopefully everybody can see my screen now. During this section, we want you to be thinking about what's important to your stakeholders, what's important to you in terms of the actual impacts, the benefits that you might be achieving from the energy efficiency actions. Sorry. And here at the IEA, we like to call this the multiple benefits of energy efficiency. And because oftentimes we find that the actions on energy efficiency are typically not taken just because of the energy savings. Many times it's energy savings and GHG emissions, the 2 yellow ones. But oftentimes there's a lot of organizations and governments that are going to do it for many other reasons. And those other reasons, we like to call them for the developing and emerging economies, the energy efficient prosperity. In that energy efficiency is a means to support both economic and social development goals, increase jobs, improve air pollution, health and well-being, and all of those types of things that is really the one of the main reasons for our governments to be working, of course. Within those multiple benefits, there's many different associated values for them, depending on the audience. From this particular perspective, what we're seeing here is from an energy access perspective. So in Ghana, one of the important reasons to have minimum energy performance standard on appliances is that you can actually have more appliances being used by people within the energy that's available to the homes and businesses within Ghana. And so energy access is one of the benefits that could be part of your own plan. Second, on lighting, well, while this is a picture of lighting on a street, it's a good visual to show the difference between 2 different lighting types. And we've found that in buildings, improved lighting, light fixtures, and lighting controls can, of course, improve the energy savings, but can also improve safety and security and the ability to reduce theft and make your home feel safer and more valuable. From a utilities perspective, there's actually benefit for utilities in that the cost of building new generation can actually be more expensive than the cost to save energy through energy efficiency. So therefore, in Indonesia, we're working with the government there and have found that it's potentially 14 times more expensive to build electricity power generation compared to the energy efficiency savings through energy efficient appliances and equipment. Then from an owner and occupant perspective, we all have different reasons when we're living or working in a building. The number one often tends to be comfort. We want to be comfortable, and if the energy efficiency helps deliver lighting comfort, thermal comfort, and noise comfort, that's important to us as users of the space. Health in New Zealand And in the UK, they've been working a lot on the improved health and essentially the savings for the healthcare system by having improved energy efficiency in homes and buildings. Also operations and maintenance, safety and security that I mentioned before, and then also increased property value. If you have more efficient, nicer homes and buildings, you're going to have reduced turnover and increased rental income. From the societal perspective, of course, we're looking for improved jobs. That helps improve economics. Productivity comes through that as well. Improved emissions. On the energy side, just having more energy efficient energy system, you could say. And then, of course, on the air pollution side, of course, we're working with cities and nationally in China, and one of their main concerns, of course, is air pollution. And then for cities and nations, energy access, actually having that access to all of the citizens of our cities and nations. Economic development is really a local issue, and bringing those jobs locally. Poverty alleviation is also a very, very local issue, and you know, having increased affordability of energy can help ensure that those hovering near poverty can stay to be, you know, healthier and more productive and spend less money. Local air pollution and climate change resilience, actually having durable buildings that are energy efficient and have a good life cycle value, you could say. Now, when we talk about city budgets or municipal budgets or state budgets, there are both increases and decreases in incomes and expenses associated with energy efficiency. And one of the most obvious ones is the first, sales tax. Well, by having more energy efficient products, you're actually increasing the income from the taxes on the energy efficient products, but you're decreasing the income on the inefficient products. So there's a win and a lose there depending on how the tax structures are set up. Also, when we're actually investing in energy efficiency, that means there's an increased expense on that energy efficiency. But you would then have savings on health, social welfare, and unemployment benefits, so the expenses would go down. You'd have increased revenue on real estate transactions if the properties become more valuable. You would also have expenditures on the actual energy that's consumed by the public sector going down, and also the subsidies that would go to consumers as well. So those are both very good expenses that would go down. Interestingly, though, on the carbon tax or excise duty, those, like the taxes, could also go down as an income source. However, the sales and income tax on the goods and services associated with energy efficiency would go up. And then the public investment in the energy supply infrastructure, as I was mentioning regarding Indonesia, that's a big potential savings of future expenses. So with all those, I'd like to open it back up like Eric did and see which benefits are important to you and you know, your stakeholders, the occupants, the investors. I'll open that up to the floor. And any other questions that you might have?
It's Tulani here. Thanks, Brian. I work with the city of Tshwane, so we're doing some work with the city of Tshwane in South Africa. So what has been coming up, and I think what is most interesting to them is the financing around it. So it's two parts. So it's the financing of some of these projects, so source for that, and the second thing, it's the other incentives, particularly in them trying to eventually get the private sector, commercial property developers and owners to to do certain interventions as far as energy efficiency goes. So it would be interesting to hear from you some of the approaches on the financing side, and the second part is the different incentives. I saw some of them on one of your slides. Do you mind just briefly mentioning those two things?
Yeah, that'd be great. So what we find is that the investors and the financing sources, they want to have good data. And one of the partners for the Building Efficiency Accelerator is the Investor Confidence Project. And you should take a look at their website. They've set up a method for collecting data that would give the confidence to the financiers that they're going to achieve these benefits. So if we know that there's a certain value associated with air pollution, we know that there's a certain value associated with health, and we know that there's a certain value associated with energy, maybe the financiers could track, essentially, data associated with those benefits, and that would be in the development of the policy or in the development of the project, could be the means for getting that financing. So I think the Investor Confidence Project is probably a good partner to look at in the BEA to dig in more on how to structure a conversation with the banks and funders, both for incentives and for financing. Other thoughts or questions?
Hi, hello. This is Julia Martinez from Mexico, and I have the same question. We have a very well advanced city in Mexico City that is now making audits for almost 30% of the public buildings. But we also have small cities like Mérida in Yucatan, and they have developed their own greenhouse gas inventory and also training on how to adopt and adapt the energy conservation code. So I would like to have the same information that the previous speaker regarding funding for starting energy efficiency projects in small municipalities.
Okay, thanks, Julia. So there was a little bit of garble in the middle, but I think I understood that your question is how small cities would be able to start doing this as well, just like Mexico City has. And of course, Mexico is fortunate that World Bank has a large financial source that is able to be used by cities across Mexico, and that could be used essentially towards developing policies or projects on energy efficiency at the municipality level. The other, and of course the other resource that you were involved with is the Building Energy Codes roadmap that sets out goals for cities across Mexico in terms of adopting building energy code language that's developed at the national level in the decades ahead. I think resources like that, I think, are helpful for cities that maybe are not doing anything yet. But of course, locally, you need to have the political will, and getting that right in the the turnover that happens in the Mexico City leadership teams. Getting that right when there's political will to move forward, I think, is helpful. We've seen in Bandung, Indonesia, a new mayor came in and really wanted to make Bandung a very energy efficient city. So as mayors come in with those goals, it's important to support them with the tools and resources.
Yes, Thank you, Brian. Yes, the mayor of Merida is very much committed to energy efficiency and is already talking to CENER about it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so with that, I'll move on and feel free to step in if you have another question. So now I'm going to talk about the assessing the impacts of energy efficiency actions, and the WRI team is going to be, well, the BEA team is supporting cities doing deep dives on estimating the impacts, and that is starting out with 7 deep dive cities, assessing the energy, environmental, and economic impacts, like the multiple benefits that we just discussed. There's a process where, in line with everything else that these cities are doing, once the project and policy is defined, identifying the causal chain, the actual steps of energy savings and impact savings in a city, determining the methods for calculating and collecting data, and then actually collecting and calculating those emissions and other savings, and then producing a report. So this is a deep dive activity that's going to be happening, and it's obviously starting off with some training webinars from here in April through July, and hopefully this will be will really be a good set of examples that other cities can use as we move forward.
And Brian, if I can add, this is Eric, just to note, this first of those 4 training webinars is tomorrow, and there are actually 2 of them happening tomorrow, one timed for the Western Hemisphere, another time for the Eastern Hemisphere. So you should have seen an invitation from Aris to join that first webinar if you want to learn more about this process and how to be making these sort of impact estimates for your cities. Please register and join that tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Okay, and in terms of being able to identify how do I assess these impacts, there's a number of resources, and one in particular that's used globally is IEA's Energy Efficiency Indicators Manual, and there's a country practices database that's on the website for the indicators analysis. And in that, you can see different methodology types for surveys, for modeling savings, for measuring savings, and then also just what other administrative resources there might be used in other countries globally. So I'd encourage you to take a peek at that and see if there's something that's being done at the national level in your country that should be potentially used or even modified for your needs locally. An example on residential data collection is a survey in Spain where they actually spend 4 days per household by an energy auditor, where they go end use by end use and look at all of the characteristics of the home. So this is a very deep, in-depth data collection approach. And in New Zealand, there's one that uses a bottom-up statistical model plus purchased software tool, and they do estimates based on actual statistics that are in New Zealand, and they do this method every 5 years for the commercial buildings. So there are different types of ways for you to identify both your starting point, your baseline, and then your impacts moving forward over time, depending on what data you have available and what resources might be available as well. Now, there's a whole series of tools that have been collected on the Building Efficiency Accelerator platform online. So you can see this web link at the very bottom here. It's a knowledge management system, energy efficiency at the Copenhagen Center for Energy Efficiency. And in there, you'll actually be able to get access to the Tracking Progress Framework, and other tools and resources. So, and with that, I'm going to open it up for a few more questions, and I'm going to hand the screen back over to Eric as well, as he will start walking us through the example. So any questions?
Hi, it's Zaya from Mozambique City.
Yes.
Can we? Is there any universal indicators that the BEA is trying to recommend to the member cities? Or I would like to calculate our indicator in greenhouse gas emissions, if possible.
Yeah. Yes. So we do have a. I think it's in the Word document format on the knowledge management system through the BEA website. You'll find the Tracking Progress Framework. Inside of that framework, while it's still completely flexible, there are a series of tables in there that do list some indicators that you could use. So that would be one resource. The other resource is the Energy Efficiency Indicators Manuals at the IEA from that website I mentioned earlier. If you just search online for Energy Efficiency Indicators Manual, you should be able to find that as well. But there's a whole series of different levels of detail. Some from the high level, which is energy use per square foot or energy use per person, and then some go in more detailed levels, such as energy use for heating per heated floor area. Those types of indicators are also possible. But I would say for the Building Efficiency Accelerator, it's quite flexible, and it's really what are the important metrics or indicators, and what benefits is it that you want to track for your stakeholders.
Yeah, second that. I think that's a good transition to talking through the example as well. It really is a matter of what is most important, which of these multiple benefits of efficiency and other impacts do you most want to convey, because there are many options of indicators which have value. Yeah, so in the interest of time, we'll have more time for question at the end, but I want to walk through this one example of using the Tracking Progress Template, which may answer some of your questions and may create some more questions as well. If you've been able to, the documents we're referring to, the best place to get them is on the BEA Basecamp. On there you can see a recent message posted on the message board that links to these documents. Please be at least thinking through for your own city how you would be answering these questions as we walk through this example. So this is what's included in that Word document that you can download on the Basecamp system. And we're going to think through what this looks like, and depending on who you are and where you are and how you would answer these questions. Here's the steps that we suggest to walk through answering these questions. First, starting with identifying your goal, at least one goal for each of those 5 BEA steps. So what do you as a BEA city have committed to a policy and a project, and so that's your overall objectives of what you want to achieve in the near term under the BEA. But in order to make it simpler and to get there, we're asking you to identify goals for each of these stages to make it more bite-sized chunks, easier things to achieve, and that you can show progress to your stakeholders early on in meeting the goals that you've set out. So for each stage, identifying the most important goals and trying to keep it to less than 3 goals per stage, and that making sure that those goals address both your policy and project actions for each of those stages. And then once you've identified the goals, identifying a corresponding indicator for each of those goals, and then for each of those indicators, identifying a method to track and report it. So that's the first element of developing the step one that's identified in the template, those first 3 columns. And then the next step is to implement your work plan, and as you move along, track your progress. You should be recording that and writing that down in the step 2, this 4th column, the outcomes column. And if things change as you go through the implementation process, you can adjust your goals and indicators and methods, but it's important to document why you made those changes, to talk through them with your stakeholders and be transparent about those changes. So that's the general suggested steps, and this is also a version of this is included in the Tracking Progress template Word document as well for your reference. So just to walk through a hypothetical example. So here's a place that's called Example City, a city with lots of examples perhaps, and we're just going to walk through some of their examples from how they have set their goals, indicators, and methods. So this is a city that for its commitment stage, like many of you, their goals in this first stage is around establishing a shared vision. Why is efficiency important to the city? Why do they want to take action? That's their goal for this stage. That's an important foundational element. So to measure that, they have identified that they want to measure the number and variety of types of organizations that join a kickoff event that they're going to host, and they want to understand the quality of engagement, what kind of engagement those organizations are taking place in or committing to take place in after the kickoff event. So here's how they plan to measure those indicators. They will be looking at how the recognition of the different partners are done, whether that's in a summary report, the listing of who participated, or ideally in local media coverage, attention from the press and from the general public about how these organizations or these businesses are engaging to improve building efficiency in the city. And then also they want to get these participants to commit to being involved in working groups going forward to help with the assessment stage. So here's just some very specific examples for commitment stage, what goals, indicators, and methods one city could put forward. Again, each of these should be adjusted to what you want to achieve at each of these steps, but here are some examples. So moving to the stage 1, the city wants to, in its assessment stage, it wants to use information and data on buildings to inform which projects are selected. So they've committed to implementing a project under the BEA. They want to know where to start. That's at least partially a decision that can be driven by politics or by stakeholders, but they also want it to be informed by data on opportunities for energy savings. And then they're also collecting data to inform policy actions, so how energy use is used across the city, for example, as well as what other programs are in place, a variety of data points they may want to consider. So how will they measure the achievement of these goals? Well, they want to collect data for a significant number of buildings, collect data on their energy use and how those buildings themselves are used, for what purposes, what hours, things like that. And then regarding policy actions, they're identifying that they want to learn about what data sources are available out there, and then to build relationships with the people who manage those data sources, those programs that they want to learn from, so that they can be involved in the process of the BEA and be informed and contributors to that process. So you can see that these two indicators connect directly to the two goals that are set into the goal column. And then for methods, the city has identified specifically which tools they want to use to enter information about their buildings. So in this case, they identified Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a tool out of the United States, but has become a bit of a global standard around how to collect information on energy use in buildings to allow for comparison across buildings in a portfolio, which could be really valuable for a city as they want to understand and compare the opportunity so that they have in one building to another to understand where they would want to prioritize their energy savings efforts. They've also identified that they want to use a tool called CURB. This is a tool that the World Bank has developed to help cities assess actions they can take, climate actions, including energy efficiency actions in buildings. So this is more about baseline data on energy use across the city in buildings, not just in public buildings, as the city is looking to identify what sort of policy actions they may want to take. So that's the assessment stage. The development stage, things become a bit more complicated, and depending on how you want to identify your goals, it may at this point make sense to further distinguish which goals are related to the project and which are related to the policy. This city has identified that for the development stage, they want to make sure that they have a very clear sense of what the energy efficiency improvement project is they want to achieve and in what location. So they want to select a site, develop project documentation, and obtain the project funding. They want to have all of that in place by the end of the stage so that they're ready to make the case they have all the components they need to actually begin the implementation, the construction of that improved building. On the policy side, they're looking to draft a regulation and then have it adopted, and to ensure that there's support for its implementation in the next stage. So indicators for this, they've identified a specific number of buildings that they want to have audits on, and then they want to identify particular finance sources to meet the needs to implement the specific measures that are identified in the audience, in the audits. So they'll have a clear sense of what actions, what energy saving measures in each building make sense, the costs of each of those measures, and they'll know how much in the way of resources they'll need to be able to implement them. For the policy, this is another indicator around stakeholder engagement, understanding very clearly who is influencing the decision making around regulation and construction, and to make sure that the conversations that need to happen, the ways that support needs to be developed to support those regulations are taking place. And then how to track this. Sharing the results of the audits with key stakeholders and potential funders, understanding what funders' terms and metrics for measuring their project investments look like, and being able to collect the data to be able to meet those terms. And then for the policy, it's developing a clear method and tracking of who is being talked to, in what ways, what types of stakeholders, and to be able to prioritize what engagements they want to have. So that's an example of the first 3 stages of the BEA process. I have another slide here with the next 2 stages. I'm not going to walk through these in as much detail for the sake of time, but we'll make these slides available so you can walk through them yourselves. And just to note that a very similar process you'll see in the implementation stage. There's much more emphasis on the actual energy savings, and the indicators that you want to have. Probably makes sense to have something on energy savings, but maybe another indicator that's really important to you is the economic impact. What are the cost savings? You see here also under the policy there's a metric around the compliance rate for a building energy code, and to make sure that there's a plan to measure and ensure that that the code is being implemented in a way that that the energy savings that should be possible are achieved. And then in the improvement stage, you see here this is an emphasis on thinking about how to improve the existing projects or programs to move beyond doing just a couple of buildings to be able to think about a program that could do it at a citywide scale. Also thinking about how to improve the building code that the city has identified that they're going to implement. So that's thinking about how to do better in the next phase of this work. And then just finally, one other thing I wanted to mention is about how you can use this to track outcomes. So here's the three stages that we walked through in more detail from the previous slides. Once the city actually begins implementing these actions, they can use the same template to write down what they have achieved at any particular point. So you can see the date here. This is 6 months later after the city originally filled out this template with their goals, indicators, and methods. And now they're coming back and saying, all right, what have I achieved in 6 months? We're encouraging you to do this a little bit more frequently, about every 3 months. So maybe this is the second time they're updating this document to note how far they've come in their achievements. So under the commitment stage, for the indicators that they've noted, the number of organizations that are engaged, they've noted that there were 50 organizations that took part at the kickoff event. They noted the kind of organizations who were there, and they noted which of the organizations and how many of them were noted in media coverage of that event. Because those were the indicators they set. And then they also noted that 20 of those organizations joined working groups to help with the implementation of the BEA actions, and they've noted how many of them have participated in meetings going forward. For the assessment stage, 6 months after they set these goals, the city has now put 15 public buildings, the data on those buildings, into the portfolio manager system they identified, and they have collected all the data points for the public buildings and private buildings sections of the curb tool into that tool as of the data available for 2015. And finally, for the development stage, they are in the process of those audits. You can see that they have not completed this stage because they have not finished those audits, for example. But they will be finished in July based on how the city has its work plan scheduled. And then they've noted that stakeholders have been engaged in workshops. They've noted the key stakeholders here related to implementation of a national building energy code to make it implementable for the city. So that's a lot of content, I know. This was intended to just give a little bit more concrete examples of how you can use this template. I want to get your questions, but before that I just want to note that we are strongly encouraging each BEA city to use this template. We're asking you to fill this out by the end of this month, by April 30th. If you need more time, you're welcome to take it. But we're asking you to do this as soon as possible and to share it with your stakeholders so that it can be a transparent way of describing in a simple sense what you want to achieve at each phase, at each stage in your project, and a way for you to share progress as you go along. Please begin thinking through these goals, indicators, and methods for each of your stages. Many of you have already thought through this in terms of where you want to be in the long term, or in the medium term, asking you to now just break it down to make it a little bit more specific at each stage, to make it easier to communicate and track progress, and to see that you are moving forward, even if it feels like that big goal is still very far away. So with that, I would love to take your questions, hear your reflections on this template. Are there things about it that are unclear? Are there ways that the BEA can better support you in using this template? And does it, fundamentally, does it help to meet your needs with tracking and communicating your progress of your work in your city? Love your thoughts on that.
Hi, Eric. It's Aris. We have a question from one of the attendees, which unfortunately cannot speak up due to microphone issues. The question is, it's about the baseline. Can you show us a real example of baseline? And is the baseline compulsory because it is difficult to collect data in Da Nang city?
Okay, yeah. So this is actually one way of thinking about a baseline. So I know this is a question I think about specifically how we've described the tracking progress commitment in the past under the BEA. We are trying to simplify that commitment by asking all cities to use this template as the kind of foundational tracking progress method. So I would say, as a short answer to that question, use this template, put information in it, and use this as a starting point for how you want to track progress going forward. You may identify later in the process you'll need a more detailed system, for example, of setting a baseline and tracking progress of energy consumption at the city scale or at the building scale. You may need to develop different systems for that. Start with this as a starting point. And then use this, your progress and your advancement through the different stages to understand what other data you need to collect and what sort of baselines are relevant to the specific actions that you're selecting. So no, a baseline itself is not a requirement under the BEA. There's no specific requirement or guidance that we have around how to set a baseline. Although if that's relevant to the actions that you're selecting, it's something you'll want to do at some point in the process, quite likely. So for example, right, the city that we discussed here, they decided that they wanted to set baselines in stage 1 in this assessment, but they identified specific ways they wanted to set the baseline. So they set a baseline of understanding how energy is used in a set of public buildings. And then also they wanted to understand how to set a baseline for their city as a whole using the methodology in the curb tool. So those are two kinds of baselines that that this example city set in stage 1. But there are other methods that you may want to choose. Good question. And hopefully through using this template, you'll be able to prioritize and identify what sort of methods, baseline being one of them, you'll want to use to track your progress.
Thanks, Eric. We have one more question. It's about the stage 4, the improve. And the question is, can we skip the goal and indicators for the stage because it should be done based on practical results from the stage 3 implementation, and we need some time to see the results?
That's a great question. I would strongly encourage you not to skip it. I think it's very important to have in mind what when you're beginning this process, to understand where you want to go. I think it's quite possible that you won't have that much in the way of detail when you first set the goals, indicators, and methods for each of the stages. And again, as we noted in the instructions, you can change these as you go along. You can adapt your goals, you can make them more specific as you learn things through the BEA process. But it is really important to be thinking when you start that this is about a long-term process. It's about a process of continuous improvement, and setting that up and being clear about that and communicating that with your stakeholders early on is very important. I know that there's in a lot of cities it's difficult to set a long-term plan and a long-term process, especially with when administrations change, priorities change, and we know that it won't look exactly how we put it on paper, but it's important to have an idea and to also to get buy-in around this idea that this isn't just a one-time thing. The BEA is not just about taking action for 1 year and then doing another thing next year when there's funding up for something else, and that there's a commitment from partners that this is an important thing for the city and it's not an issue that's going away. It's not something that can be addressed in a year. It's a process of continual improvement, and that means it's going to need to be thinking about how that gets done in the future. So I know that that stage in particular is probably the most challenging one to be specific about, and that's okay. But just have a sense in there about, you know, what are some options of how you could improve what you're doing. So for example, in this stage, this example that I have up on the screen from the example city, you know, they've identified that for their policy, they're thinking about, all right, so maybe 5 years after we've had the code implementation, we should think about how to improve it, right? To begin the process, a cycle of improving, you know, the technical elements of that code. They're also looking at incentives, right? So maybe a first stage is to set that minimum standard through policies, and then maybe for other stakeholders, it's really important to have incentives in place. Those two things can be very complementary to each other. So this is also a place where you can record the things that you know stakeholders think are important, but that you can't take on in this first phase of your work because there's just not enough attention, and you need to enough resources, and you need to focus your attention on one or two actions. So that's another way you can use this, is to note what are some other important opportunities that you're not able to focus on in the first phase. Great question. Others?
Yeah, hi Eric, this is Andrea from Colombia.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi, how are you? I've got a question because, well, this template, I understand that help us to report and track progress under the program in general. But for Bogota, where we choose a policy and there is the need to develop a tracking and report method for the policy itself, I guess that in the development stage we have to develop a tracking process for the policy itself, not only to report the progress under the program BEA, but also to report the progress to the city and to the citizens about the policy. So I identified in this part like 2 levels of tracking, which is one under the generality of program BEA, and this is something that we will use to report to you and also to get fundings, but also we have a need for the policy to report and to communicate the progress of the policy to the city and to the citizens, and also to make it helpful to improve and to promote energy efficiency in Bogota.
Yeah.
So
yeah, great point. Yeah, and you know, Brian or Debbie, if you want to weigh in here as well, you're welcome to. What I would say on that is, I would again similarly start with this template, and if you identify sections of it that need more detail, you may want to develop you know, separate documents to, you know, for example, what you just described, Andrea, I would think of as being in the stage 3 implement policy section, right? So maybe right here where we have policy written, and it says compliance rate of 50% within 3 years and a rate of 80% in 5 years, maybe there's actually a lot more detail, and that's just the summary. Maybe there's a whole other document that describes how you will measure the implementation of the policy. And if that's so, and if that's something that stakeholders need, it's okay to write it in more detail and just to include a summary of it here. But this document should encapsulate not all the details, but at least all of the elements of what you are tracking progress on. So, you know, maybe it's a 10-page document that describes how you're going to track compliance rate and how that actually translates to energy savings. But the key metric you want to be tracking is compliance rate. So that's why it's presented here under stage 3 indicators, for example. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
Hi guys, this is Bandish from Rajkot. First, I would like to know, like, from the tracking progress resources that are there on the base camp and on the website. Which of the tools would be more relevant and suitable for Indian context? And secondly, I think the tool that we've discussed right now was great, and I think as we play around it, I think we'll be able to realize the practical challenges that we might face. Regarding that, this tracking progress only, I wanted to know, like, is there any scope or mechanism wherein we can involve a third-party assessment or something to have more transparency in the process? So, yeah.
Great question. Yeah, so in terms of tools, Brian noted the tools that are on the knowledge management system for C2E2, which are several tools that have been identified by the BEA partners. It's not exhaustive. There's actually one report in there which may be particularly helpful that C2E2 and WRI developed that goes through, I think, like 50 or so tools related to building efficiency in cities for different purposes. I would suggest that might be a place to start. And then, of course, we're happy to connect you with experts who know more about building efficiency in your particular region. So, for example, I think we already connected you, Bandish, with some folks at the Pacific Northwest National Lab who developed some resources and tools specific to India. But happy to do that with other cities as well, as you're looking for more specific suggestions of tools. On the third-party assessment, yes, I think that is important. I do think also that it's the sort of thing that will become most important in stages 3 and stage 4. Having a plan for how you want to do that at stage 3 and stage 4 is important, but also not spending too much time on the details of it when you're in stage 0, 1, and 2. You want to have a general sense of, yes, here's a time we would want to have third parties involved, but I don't think it's as important to have the details of that figured out. In most cases, you'll want that third-party assessment when you're in the improve stage to be understanding how to make your programs better or your policies better. So yes, that's important to be thinking about, and you may want to note that in here as well. There's also, just the other element of that question is around costs too, right? So that's another reason why it's important to be putting this long-term plan in place, is to understand, what costs you're going to have at certain points in different stages in the future. If you're identifying that you do need a third-party assessment, you don't necessarily need to cost that out now, but when you're in stage 3 and about to get into stage 4, you're going to want to have a sense of, what do you, what's the scale of those costs and how you will pay for them. So having this longer term plan will help you to anticipate those sort of things. Costs and also human resources of expertise that you may want to have on your team and in your stakeholder groups, etc. Other questions or comments? And I imagine we will have many more as each of you begin using this template, and we welcome them and happy to help you through answering these questions. The global BEA team, the members of the working groups, as well as the kind of regional liaisons in your regions and your city liaisons as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out with additional questions.
Hi, Eric. We have one more question. The question is about the tracking report and when we will have to submit our first tracking report, because we need time to track the impact of policy and project. But as the attendee remember, you said the report has to be done in September 2017.
Yeah, so a good question. We are, as this slide shows, we're asking you to complete this template by the 30th of April. So that's an emphasis on step 1, goals, indicators, and methods. But once you've done that, it'll be pretty easy for you to say the answers for step 2 as well, for where you are right now. What outcomes have you seen for each of the goals that you've set? So we're asking you to do that as soon as possible by April 30th, if possible. And then we are encouraging you to submit that to the BEA, and then we would encourage you on a 3-month basis to send updates. So once you've developed the goals, indicators, and methods, that's the heavy lift. And then we're just asking you essentially to update the content in the outcomes column every 3 months and share that with the BEA global coordination team. And the reason why is we want to be able to better understand what are the needs across the BEA network, what are the goals you're trying to achieve right now, how are you doing and outcomes related to those goals, and then how can we best support you through different partners from the BEA to help with that stage. We don't want it to be an overly burdensome reporting requirement, but it'll help us to help you. So that's why we're suggesting every 3 months as a suggested pace for doing your updates. If it's helpful for you to do it more frequently and to share with your stakeholders, here's where we are this month, you may find that to be a helpful way to get engagement from your local stakeholders. You're welcome to do that as well. Regarding the September deadline, so essentially, I guess we would be probably asking for two updates to this between now and that end of September on basically a quarterly basis. That September deadline is an important one because that's when this phase of the BEA and the resources that the BEA has to support each of the cities, where we begin having less of them. So that's the point at which we want you to be able to have made the case as clearly as possible as to why other programs, other partners should be investing in this, whether that's the city itself should be putting some of its own money in, or it's a development agency or a private sector partner, about why they should be investing in the specific projects you've identified, the policies you've identified, where you're articulating the benefits and a clear plan for how you will achieve them. So that's why it's, I think, particularly important that you get as far as you can in stage 2, ideally to be completing stage 2 and entering stage 3, where you're actually beginning to implement the projects by the end of September. I know that's a challenging time frame for many of you, but the further you can get in the development stage, the more likely you'll be successful in being able to enter the implementation stage, and that we'll be able to help you make that case to other project partners to continue the work.
Yeah, and this is Debbie. Just to be clear, the BEA will still be around and supporting the work of you and all of your cities well past September. We have these goals for 2030, so we'll still be providing support past September. This is just sort of the first milestone that we are hoping that you'll be able to, as Eric said, articulate some of these for your city.
All right. Any other final questions? We're already a little over time. Thank you for taking the time. Any final questions? Well, hearing none, thank you for your great questions. And as we said, we look forward to further questions. If you have specific challenges in using the template, do your best to fill it out as completely as you can. And if you have questions, share what you've done already as part of how you ask your questions, so we have more context on how to answer that. Again, these slides and this recording will be posted in the next few days, and on Basecamp, let me know if you're having trouble finding any of this template itself, which is the main thing you'll need to be able to get started on filling it out.
Thank you very much, Eric. It seems that we finally reached at the end of the webinar. I would like to thank Debbie, Eric, and Brian for the informative and interesting presentations, and the audience for their active participation. The presentation will be beneficial for all stakeholders involved in green building. Thank you for your attention and wish you a good day or night from Copenhagen. Bye.